Thank you for coming out today. We were laughing at when we first started doing these talks 10, 12 years ago. We wouldn't have a turnout like this. So thank you for the interest, for the experience, for everything else. And Clint, I've been working with him for 4 or 5 years. First time I've met him, so it's great getting out and seeing people. So we sold our farm, going to be just about 3 years ago now. Dad wanted to retire, and I did the economics of hiring someone to help me out doing weird things, and I knew I wouldn't be able to hold on to anybody for any period of time. And if you look at $50,000 a year at 10% margin, I would have to sell $500,000 worth of seed in order to justify that person being around. So it just didn't make any economic sense. I had some equity in the farm, so sold it. So last couple of years, what I did is I was seeding down full season cover crops, and I was custom grazing bison. And the really neat thing with this is if you can kind of imagine, with the bison, they are normally in a real tight herd. They're nature's mob grazers, right? They like being close together because of predators, fear. So if you could imagine 5,000 of these critters in a herd like this going across the prairies, and how quickly do they come back to graze that? Next year, maybe the year after. It really, the damage that they do going across is like tillage. But then they give the rest, and they give the land time to heal. So this is, once again, one of these aha moments as we're going through and doing the learning. So today we're going to go through some soil health basics. We're going to go with, what's new in cover cropping world. We're going to talk about some liquid carbon, stable soil carbon in our system. And if anybody's interested, we can talk about my experience. I spent the last year out in Australia doing a bunch more learning about how similar we are. And hopefully I'm going to talk slower, and then this way maybe something will, either I was talking about some really funky stuff for you, or it's that drinking from the fire hose thing. So when we start going through and looking at that soil health, basically, what is the definition? And as I go through, I don't like over-defining anything, because when we over-define it, that gives us no ability to adapt. There's no flexibility in it. So soil health is basically increasing the resilience of the soil to continue and to function as an independent, complexly related ecosystem. It's just, we have functioning soil. We don't need to do much to it. It's going to do what it has to do to get these plants growing, to feed the animals, to do their thing. And one of the things that I've always chuckled about is Dr. Chris Nichols, extremely intelligent lady. I would love to know just the stuff that she forgot, never mind what she knows. But when she was going through her Bachelor of Science in Agriculture, the experts said that we know that 0.1% of what's going on in the soil. When she finished her master's, so 2 years later, the experts said, okay, we know about 0.01% of what's going on in the soil. 4 years later, when she finished her PhD, the experts said we know about 0.001% of what's going on in the soil. So the more educated she got, the dumber she became, is what her line is. And it's, once again, the people that have been in this, like, we've been at it for quite a while doing the cover crops and soil health, and the stuff we're learning every year. Like, Mother Nature is throwing us curveballs. As we fix the soil, new problems show up. And so we have to adapt, we need to observe, we need to be doing these steps as we go along. And this whole soil health, it isn't an endpoint. We were talking about that a little earlier. It's a journey, because as we go in and we have a system developed for our farm, now we're going to take that quarter section that is a little different, we're going to do a different management plan for it. When we have that 160 acres down and we get it cranking, now we're going to have 40 acres of that field that, oh yeah, there's a sand lens that runs through there. We're going to manage that a little differently. Now we're going to take, once we get that going, now we're going to have this 5-acre patch of salinity. And we're going to address that. And so it's all based on what our goals are, what our perceived issues are, and how observant we are to be able to drill down and do those changes. Oh, didn't hit my button for my bees. So this is that whole thing of coming out to a deal like this. Hopefully you'll pick something up. Hopefully you're going to be meeting people and having discussions with them. We'll be sharing stories of this is the problem that we faced. This is the strategy we undertook to fix it. Did it work? Didn't it work? Why didn't it work? That's the biggest thing. In Western Canada, there's basically 2 fields that have absolutely stumped me. There's always a little hiccups where we didn't get to where we want as quick as we want, but they're both in Alberta. One is down near Vulcan, and the other one's up at Rimbey. We were growing cover crops, and neither one of them worked. Like, we're talking stuff that was this high. What happened? Well, I started doing some digging, literally, and the one at Rimbey, the guy had canola that was this high, got a hailstorm, got a plow in, plowed it under, and it plowed it down to about a foot. So now you have this green material that's anaerobic rotting. When it's anaerobic and rotting, it gives off alcohol, which nothing likes growing through. So we have this alcohol layer in there that is limiting the amount of roots we can put through there. So, we got some of the tap roots going down. Okay, we've got that. We've got it so it's semi-functioning now. The other one is at Vulcan, and I have no idea what's wrong with it. On irrigation, they grew a full season cover crop on irrigation, and they got 1.5 tons wet biomass off it. So when you say that things aren't working right, okay, that's really not working right. So what we've done, so this is the year 2. The first year that we went in, it didn't work. Second year, he decided he was going to go different company. Well, that really didn't work. So this year we went in with a winter cereal. He's going to chop it in June. We're going to terminate it. We're going to go in with a little bit of herbicide. We'll talk about some organic principles also, but his plan is to terminate because he has some fall rye in there because we need to get rid of the allelopathy. Then we're going to seed a warm season cover crop with lots of biennials again. We're going to hit it really hard with root exudates. And the root exudate part, if there's only one thing you leave here today, root exudates, root exudates, root exudates. That is the key of what we want to do when we're getting through and building soil health. So my soil health principle is a little different than what some of the other ones out there, but they're, at the end of the day, it's the same message. Number 1, if you're only going to do one thing when you're leaving today, keep a plant in the vegetative stage for as many days possible. Dr. Chris Nichols says that we should be able to do 260 to 280 days having a green plant in the vegetative stage in our soils here. You get down to Botano, you're probably going to be 290. Once again, our frost-free days aren't that long. How do we keep a green plant growing for that many days? So as we see our snowbanks disappearing again, what do you see underneath it? In some areas, you have green grass. So those days under the snow, we still have a green vegetative plant growing. Is that plant actually doing anything? Just because it's green, is it actually? Or is it... Not fast. Okay. There's something happening. In order for it to stay green, there has to be biological processes happening. And if it's not, so if you go on that canola field just down the road that probably is sprayed in the fall, and you see the snow disappearing there, what do you see for green? Nothing. What's going on there biologically? Very little. And when we start getting warmer, not this minus 13 stuff, and we start getting some heat above zero, what's going to happen? We're going to get a bunch of bacteria up and going. That bacteria is going to be breaking down the organic matter because they're looking for a carbon source, and it's going to cause further degradation of the soil. But we'll get into that a little bit further. Number 2, increase the functional plant diversity. And that can be within our crop, or our pasture, our hay, our feed, or our cropping systems. And it doesn't have to necessarily be all in one shot, but this is that rotational effect, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. We want to reduce tillage, and maintaining that soil armor is really important. So and now once again, as organic, what other tools do you have? Well, we have to till. How do we get around minimizing? So if we have a green manure plow down, how can we reduce the number of passes to still get the job done? We want to reduce the reliance on synthetic inputs, because our soils have been built on a natural symbiotic relationships in the soil. As soon as we put fertilizer down, as soon as we put weed control, as soon as we put a fungicide, that really messes up our whole system. Might get into that a little bit later. And then properly incorporating livestock. If you want to do some reading, Montgomery has a good book, Dirt, the Erosion of Civilization. Great book, and it describes the downfall of a lot of the major empires through history. And if you look at Easter Island, really easy example. Those big stone heads sitting on the island. How did they get them there? It's a barren island. Well, the island used to be covered in forest. And what they did was they carved these huge heads on the mountains. They cut down the trees. They used them to roll these heads into position. They stood them up. And what happened to the ground cover? Gone. Then when it started raining, where did the topsoil go? Into the ocean. So now it's a barren rock out in the ocean with a bunch of big heads that are around the outside of it. You look at Greece, you look at Israel, you look at the Mesopotamia. It all used to be just an absolute oasis. Northern Africa. Goats and sheep came in, they overgrazed it, and it basically destroyed those empires. The only ones that were able to abuse a soil and last more than 1,500 years were in areas along rivers that would flood. So that flooding would replenish the topsoil, and then they can go back to gradient again. So not exactly a sustainable way of keeping empires going.
Is that what happened in India too then? Because India has been in agriculture for 2,000 years, but not all of it's a floodplain. So I question about it, I thought it was because they had cows that went around.
Yep, somewhat, yeah. And so it's population, and you look at the rivers. Would you drink the water? Yeah. So, there's a lot of things happening, and room for improvement. So cover cropping, what's new? Really, nothing. A lot of this research that is out there goes back to Sir Albert Howard back in the 40s. You go back previous than that, you go back to the native North Americans. They talk about the three sisters growing together. Nothing's new. What we're learning and the application, the science and why, okay, that's maybe getting a little new, but we'll get around that. The biggest thing is these different functional plant groups stimulating root growth. And when we have similar plants growing together side by side in a monoculture, there's actually a negative feedback in that system to reduce the amount of roots that those plants are growing. So when we have corn, heard the word corn a couple times here. So, corn, you don't want any competition, right? You want it nice and clean. And so we're going to have 30-inch centers, and we're going to have those plants 7 inches apart. Those 7 inches apart, when those plants start growing, corn will follow 12 degrees Celsius in the soil. So that, when we see it early, the soil's nice and cold, so this way it's not going to go down, we're going to go out sideways. When we have these plants 7 inches apart, they're going to go 3.5 inches, they're going to sense each other, and then they're going to grow away from each other. They don't want to intermingle, because then that's competition. So they're going to go sideways. So they're going to go 15 inches out sideways in between the rows. They're going to sense that other one coming over, and as the soil warms up, they're going to push down. What happens if we do a cover crop and we put 1 pound of corn in with our cover crop? This is in a grazing or a silage, a feed situation. What happens when we have one corn plant per every 10 square meters, 10 square yards? What does that root do? It grows normal. It goes out 360 degrees. It goes out, it follows that 12 degrees. As the soil warms up, it goes down. So you have now this huge root system that's doing its thing. If we don't have that competition, we don't have a corn plant, 7 inches apart, 14 inches apart, whatever, this plant is going to create this huge root mass. And this is one of the things we want to be doing, is creating these big, big roots. When we have the plants, so, going back to, I can't remember, I've done too many presentations if I have a picture of my corn and clover in this, but if not, I'll be able to just preamble to it. So when I was growing, take another step backwards. When my girls were going through university, what I did is I seeded 5 acres of sweet corn for them. I said, okay, I'm going to seed it, I'm going to take care of it, and when it comes to picking, it's up to them to market. And whatever the money they get, that goes to their tuition. Okay, so what I did is I'd seed a blend of low-growing clovers, so subterranean clover, Persian clover, crimson clover, seeded it, and then I seeded corn into that. So I let it germinate, let the clover start coming up, and I seeded corn into it. And the experts say, can't do that. That's competition. When we start looking at how nature works, grasses and legumes have co-evolved together. They need each other to grow properly. And once again, if we're going to be seeding into an alfalfa stand that we haven't sprayed out, and we're going to seed corn into it and the alfalfa gets ahead, okay, that's competition. That's a different scenario. When we have them growing and starting at the same time, they'll actually grow together, symbiotic relationship. They'll get the mycorrhizae going. In order for that legume to fix the nitrogen, it needs phosphate. The grasses accumulate phosphate. Mycorrhizae frees up phosphate in the soil. And when we can have those sources of phosphate going into that legume, going into the rhizobia in the nodule, then that legume can actually start fixing nitrogen. So that nitrogen then now can go both within that legume and get transferred over into the grass. It's a beautiful system. Once again, going through university, when I heard about mycorrhizae and sharing of nutrients, I said, why would a legume give up nutrients? It's easy, because if you want to get a little bit political, it's socialist. It wants everybody in that mix that we're growing together to thrive. When we have weeds, that's a different problem. That's showing you what the problems are in the soil. But this is the things that we want to do. We want to foster these relationships in the soil to build our soil biology. The other really neat thing is when we start looking at microbiome sharing, when we get these intermingling of roots of different species, we get this thing called microbiome sharing. When we have this diversity in the soil, we have this legacy effect that we'll talk about, and part of why we want to have good rotation and lots of diversity. And then the rhizophagy, something that when I was down in No-Till in the Plains, listened to Dr. James White talk about rhizophagy. Just once again, kind of blew my mind on how it all fits. So the microbiome. So each seed will develop its own microbiome from our system that we're managing it when we're doing grain production. Each seed will contain up to 9 billion microbes. In each seed. So once again, how many seeds of wheat do we seed in per acre? $1.25 million. 1.25 million times 9 billion microbes. How many microbes are we putting down just with the seed? Big number. I'm not, once again, above my pay scale. So this microbiome starts out in the seed germinates, the microbiome travels from inside that seed down the root. The root then has root exudates that feeds that microbiome. As that root is pushing through, it'll pick up more microbes from that soil onto that root. it'll continue going. The leaf will start pushing up. The microbiome will follow that leaf all the way up. It'll colonize the stem, because we talk about root exudate, but every part of the plant is leaky. It leaks out, exudates through the stem, through the leaves, flowers, whatever, it's leaking out. When we have good bricks levels in the soil, and if anybody doesn't not aware with bricks, Michael, you have bricks meter, and basically it just does a quick test of the solute in the sap. So basically sugars, the higher the number, the less problems you're going to have in your plants. No disease, no bugs, so it's a real neat quick measure of what's going on. So that we're developing this microbiome within that plant. As that plant is growing in that soil and you harvest that seed, this is the reason why when we keep our own seed back, that seed is becoming more adapted to your conditions. How we manage the soil, how we manage the microbes in the soil is going to determine how it affects our microbiome of our plants. So when you put a fungicide on, okay, so now knock out the fungi component of our microbiome. We're putting down anhydrous, okay, so that's nuking the soil for the microbes, so that's affecting our microbiome of that seed that we're producing. So all of these different management things that we're doing can change what that microbiome of that plant is up to. So when we have mixed stands, we have the legume in the grass, and we have some other plants growing in their different functional plant groups, what it's going to do is when we get that root intermingling and we get that contact of that rhizosheath between that corn plant and those clover plants, and they start touching, now they'll actually share the microbiome between that clover and that corn, or the oats and the peas, or the flax and you pick your species. If you have a good rhizosheath on that, what's going to happen is now that plant that is thriving is going to share its microbiome with that plant that's suffering. It's looking at turning on or turning off genes in that plant to make that plant stronger. So that when we have, there's a seed grower in southern Alberta. One of the things that he does is he does a wheat trial every year. And in that wheat trial, he has 6 or 7 different varieties. He seeds them out, and then of course you have a 5-gallon pail of the seed left over. And what do? You dump them into the seeder and you do a blend of a mix. Guess which one has the highest yield? Mixture. And this is where when we're growing, keep back some seed of your own. Yep, that's great. But it's always good to bring in new seed to get different microbiome in there and do a mixture. Mix it up. Once again, agriculture, the reason why we're growing monocultures is not because it's good for nature, or that's what nature wants, it's for convenience for us. Never mind when we start talking about critters. So that having those different functional plant groups, really important. Having different genotypes or some different biomes available. Do we need another table? Oh, good. So I was, yep.
Question on that. When you were talking about that plot, sweet corn plot your daughter's had, and you planted the cover crop, legume, are you putting like a full seed in, cover crop, full amount, or are you just a little bit?
So I'm going, in that case, I went in with about a 2/3 rate, because I wanted enough of a cover on the ground, but I knew that the legume and the corn weren't going to fight. I knew it was going to be positive. If I would put in a winter wheat or a fall rye or a turnip or something that's more of a scavenger, quick growing, especially a warm or cool season grass in with a warm season, that doesn't work. The oats or whatever is going to take off, going to choke out the oats in your toast. The corn. Choke out the corn. The oats will choke out the corn. So it's knowing what species are compatible, knowing how they grow, because You know, how many times have you seen a legume crop that, you know, a small seeded legume crop, you put it in the ground and boom, it's this high. Everybody complains that these clovers are so slow to get established, so you put it in with corn. So it's not going to compete. It's going to be growing. They want to grow together. So when I was in Australia, I was fortunate to stalk Dr. Christine Jones for 5 different meetings. So this is a picture from one of her talks. One of the other things she started talking about was the legacy effect, and I said, so I was in the middle of proofreading my latest book and I went up to after and I said, you know, that this all this information I'm learning today, I have to go back and I have to add more pages to my book because it was stuff that when she talks about this legacy effect in the soil, basically this is our reward for having good rotation. So that when we have a 4 or 6 year crop rotation, we tend to have better yields. We have healthier plants. And the whole idea is, once again, good healthy rhizole sheath. When we harvest that crop, those rhizole sheaths and those roots are laying in the soil. When we grow that next crop, where do those new roots want to grow? Roots are lazy. They're like me. I'm going to go where the path is easiest, and so the new roots are going to want to follow where the old roots went. And if we haven't done over tillage, if we have a good rhizole sheath, we have a healthy system, what's going to happen is those new roots are going to grow in to the rhizole sheath of the previous crops that we've grown. What does that mean? That means that that new root is coming in, it's going to have access to the microbiome of the past few crops that we've grown. How long that's going to last in the soil is going to depend on tillage, moisture, microbial activity, all of those things. And this is where, you know, reducing tillage is actually a real good thing for, you know, this is just another reason why we want to try and reduce that tillage, keep those old rhizole sheaths in the soil for as long as we can. So then when I was down in at No-Till in the Plain, the first day, yep.
On the legacy effect, how long does that last for? And if it's just, say if you went in there with a canola crop, would that lose all that legacy and you have to start over again? Because canola crops don't supplement the soil as much.
So the question was, how long does this last, and how does canola affect that? Basically, okay. So this is where, if you have something that's lignified, so when we're dealing with annual crops, that legacy effect is not going to last as long because the roots are fresher, they're not as lignified, they're going to rot down quicker. Whereas when we have that hay or pasture field, we go seed into that, those perennials have been in there for 5, 10, 15, 30, 70 years. So those are going to be a lot more resilient to breakdown, so that'll last longer. And that's the reason why when we have a hay or pasture field and we seed into it, those are going to be our better fields for 5, 10 years after we have that foraging rotation. So when it comes to canola has its own microbiome, so it's still going to be using that. It's still going to be leaving a microbiome in the soil, but yes, it's not going to be as diverse. It's not going to be as fungal. It's going to be more bacterial dominated. And that's where we'll get into the micro or the fungal bacteria ratio.
So if you did a pea canola ratio crop, you'd be more beneficial for the legacy effect later.
Correct.
Because you get more into it.
You have more. Now you throw a oat, pea, canola. Now you have a nice triangle in there. Sorry, I banged the... You might have to edit that bang out. Let's get talk. Being from Yorkton, I'm Ukrainian, so I talk with my hands quite a bit. So, No-Till in the Plains. Spent half a day with Dr. James White, and he's talking about this rhizophagy. And basically, when you break down rhizophagy, it means root feeding. And it turns out that our plant roots, the way that the preferred way of nutrient uptake is through this root feeding. This root feeding is the roots are pushing through the soil and they're absorbing microbes. They're eating microbes. There's no teeth, but they're out there and they're hunting microbes. So they're putting out signals into the soil. They have these root exudates. They're attracting and fostering certain microbes to be growing in the soil. They then, as the root tips keep pushing forward, they absorb these microbes. They strip the cell wall off of the microbe. They digest the cytoplasm, the innards of that microbe. They keep the nuclei intact, and they spin it around in the cells, inside the cell wall. They keep spinning them around because if they're sitting still, those nuclei are going to escape on them. They don't want that. So they're going to multiply these nuclei. They get to a certain level, and once again, above my pay scale, I don't know what that level is or what the mechanism. But then they'll spit those nuclei out in front of the root tip. More root exudate will go out there to foster the cell walls rebuilding around these nuclei to create a reborn bacteria or fungi or whatever it just consumed. That is the preferred way that plants want to take up nutrients, because now, instead of the old traditional looking at for when we put nitrogen down, okay, so it's nitrate. So what we're looking at, it's passive. We put down ammonium, okay, so that's a little more advanced for the plant. But when we take up nitrate in the soil, the plant has to go through 5 or 6 different steps in order to create amino acids. If it absorbs and eats a bacteria, and it's already had the amino acid or proteins already put together for them, that goes straight to amino acid or proteins. It doesn't have to get converted, because when a plant has to change nutrient status from nitrate to amino acid, it takes a lot of energy. It takes time. So it's way easier for the plant to take up those nutrients via these microbes to get put into plant growth. Anybody's brain hurting on that one? It's amazing, and once again, I said, so why are we just hearing about this now? He said, well, the technology has been known, or the process has been known since the 60s. Only now with our technology we can prove it. And so he has some videos of these nuclei spinning around in these plant cells, just unbelievable. Once again, nature's intelligence is incredible, and that's the reason why Chris Nichols says, we're probably right now knowing 0.0001% of what's going on in the soil because we're learning more. We're understanding more and understanding how complicated and how diverse this whole system is.
I've been following Dr. James White, and he's changing, as his understanding, he's saying things like in a healthy soil, where there is sort of, good functioning soil biology, I don't know, what do you know? I'm not even sure what the number is, like the percentage of the nutrient uptake by the plant, it's quite high, right?
85% is on some of these. So that
In a healthy soil, if you don't have that functioning soil biology, then this process.
Well, yeah, and so when we add fertilizer, now that plant has those free nutrients there, so it doesn't have to put out the root exudates to signal certain biology to come in. So now we've broken that relationship. Now, once again, can we get it back? Absolutely. But this is the whole idea of weaning ourselves off of fertilizer. And anybody read The Western Producer? About a month ago, there's a research showing that the free-living nitrogen inoculants for wheat really didn't work. And Christine Jones, one of the first slides when she gets into her microbe section, she goes, you have to remember microbes do not work by themselves. They always work in teams. So just like I was mentioning about growing the clovers with the corn or the peas with the oats, that the oats are calling for nitrogen. The legume says, yes, we can get you nitrogen, but I need phosphate. So between the mycorrhizae and the oats, they can move phosphate from the soil through the oats and the mycorrhizae into the legume, into the nodules. It starts fixing nitrogen. That nitrogen then is able to flow back into the legume and into the oat crop and as a root exudate and all the other good stuff. But without that signal, it doesn't happen. So when you add a free-living nitrogen fixer into the soil without having free-living phosphate solubilizer in the soil, the nitrogen fixer is not going to work. And this is I'm assuming a team of PhDs that were working on this and said, well, they're inconclusive on whether they work. There's just some really simple questions to be asking. Did you use a fungicide seed treatment? Did you put down phosphate with the seed? Did you add nitrogen to this? All of these questions that are, as a critical thinker, to me is quite obvious. But once again,
I think the question to ask is, why do you not have free-living nitrogen fixers in the system to begin with? Right? So why do you think that a silver bullet's going to be adding them to the wheat seed? You've got to ask yourself, what have you done in your management that causes it to not have free-living nitrogen fixers? And I think the main answer is that they need an aggregate function, right? So you have poorly aggregated soil. Basically, it's not a happy home for the nitrogen fixers, so they're not going to do their job.
absolutely. Another symptom that we have broken system. And so going through and looking at that, understanding, to get this rhizophagy to be working, and when we have nutrient deficiencies, once again, Dr. Elaine Ingham, she talks about if we have a nutrient deficiency, it's because we have a biological deficiency. When you start looking at it this way, it starts making a lot more sense on how we have these nutrient deficiencies based on biological deficiencies.
Another question.
Yep.
If you apply nutrients to foliar feed, does that mess up that biological system?
That's the reason why having Shorty in our little group is just, it's wonderful. So that when we start doing foliar feeding, so when we put fertilizer down, this is a good spot as any to get into my little tirade. Anybody here selling fertilizer? No? Okay, good. So the whole crop input industry, I don't want to give them too much credit because I don't think they thought it through this way. It was just a service industry, which absolutely everybody has to make money. But what a beautiful system for keeping a customer involved. Let's put it that way. So the whole idea, we want to do one pass seeding. Hey, we're going to go out, we're going to put the fertilizer down at time of seeding. So if we're going to put 120 pounds of nitrogen down, and the crop after 30 days is about this high, how much of that nitrogen is the crop using? 3%, 5%? So what's happening in the soil to the rest of the fertilizer? It's a salt. So now those microbes are going to be diving into it and they're going to be breaking this nutrient down. Because we don't have a lot of root exudate happening, when you have this 105 pounds or 110 pounds of nitrogen excess in the soil, the biological systems always want to have a carbon to nitrogen ratio, in that 12 to 14 to 1. So so the microbes are eating all this nitrogen. Where do they get the carbon from? We don't have the root exudate bringing the carbon in, so where does it get it from? From organic matter. So, it breaks down the organic matter, breaks down the glues, so what does that do to our soil aggregates? Weakens them, okay? But because these microbes are doing their thing, they're eating this synthetic nitrogen to provide, amino acids and protein. They die. Something comes along, eats them, poops them out, and so then now it's down to ammonium, then it gets broken down to nitrate. And so after those 30 days after seeding, plants this high, we have 110 pounds of nitrate sitting in the soil. When we have excess soil nitrate in our system, this is what triggers a lot of our annual weeds to grow. Anybody here have wild oats? Nope? Awesome. Good, got a good system going. And this is that whole thing of when do we spray? We spray about 30 or 40 days after seeding. When we spray, what happens to our Brix levels in our plant? Drops our Brix levels. So we may be at 10 or at 12 Brix, and now we're down to an 8. Well, guess what? That's going to open up that plant for disease. So then we go in with a fungicide. The fungicide kills off all the good and the bad fungi in our system. So then that's going to put more stress on the plant, which what happens to our Brix? Our Brix levels drop. What happens after, okay, so we have disease outbreak, we've controlled that big bad disease, but now we start getting insects starting to show up. Because we keep, every time we manage, we're dropping our Brix levels in our plants. If we start managing to promote Brix and sugars in our plant, guess what happens? We don't have these problems. Really neat experiment is if you have a pasture, and whether it's fresh, new, old, whatever, go out and fertilize with nitrogen in one strip and watch how the cows graze it. The cows will graze the fertilized strip last every time. Because the plants are going to grow faster, they're diluting the sugar in the system, and you're going to have lower Brix, you're going to have lower palatability. We were in a pasture up near Paul's a couple of years ago. Did a pasture walk. The guy had, a nice setup. And what he did is he was rotationally grazing, had 6-acre paddocks. I forget how many cows, but he was in there for 5 days. And then he would move them over. And I said, yep, nice setup. But the brome grass was this high. It was a fairly new stand, so the brome grass was still putting up a seed head. And the orchard grass was this high. And I asked the group, I said, why is the brome grass higher than the orchard grass? And they said, well, the brome it grows faster. And I said, nope, wrong answer. Got my Brix meter out, checked the Brix. The Brix on the brome was at 4. The orchard grass was at 8. Animals can detect a 0.1 change in Brix. 0.1. And they're going to usually eat the plants with the highest Brix. You doing much Brix testing?
Yep.
Yeah? Where are you at as a number?
Anywhere from 10 to 18.
Yeah. 10 to 18, that's candy. They kind of like that.
Yeah. They'll graze everything then.
Oh, yeah. But you give them the next stuff, and they'll give up that garbage on the bottom, and they'll... So, believe it or not, in a lot of cases when it comes to feed, cows are way smarter than us. If you want an interesting video, Jimmy Edmonds with SARE in the States, they did a video, and they put a GoPro on a cow. They turned them into a 15-species mix, and they did frame by frame to identify which ones that the cows went up and they sniffed, they licked, or they ate. And their grazing preferences changed from the morning to the afternoon. So the stuff that they wouldn't eat in the morning, they ate in the afternoon. Yep.
This last year we bought some hay in, and it was a good alfalfa grass hay. And we had put up some pit hay, which is just gravel pit, dry enough that we could actually cut for feed. And with marsh hay and some other grasses, a little bit of clover in it. We put the 2 bales out, the cattle walked by the new alfalfa hay, went to ate the cattail hay, the greenswood. Ate that first, and then went back to the hay, the alfalfa grass. And the only thing we could see different was probably the Brix in it from the time in it.
And diversity.
Yep.
Anybody doing feedlot here? You heard Paul's story with his Wagyu Holstein cross? So Paulie over at Birch Hills, we're doing cover crops, and that was one of the years where he was able to seed through all of his fields, his low spots. And then in June, things started raining again, so cattails and sow thistle took off, especially in the low spots, believe it or not. But dried up during silage, and he said, okay, so what do I do with this cattail and sow thistle and some cover crop in it? And I said, chop it. Do a different bag, because it is a different feed. Chop it, get it tested and just see where it is. But if you chop it before it goes brown, like nice and green, your water soluble carbohydrate's going to be high. It should be fine. You got it tested. Test came back really good. Looked very similar to the rest of the cover crop he was chopping. And so he had this Wagyu cross with a Holstein. Really good quality meat. Doesn't sound like the kind of cross we want to do. So the last 45 days, he was feeding this bulrush, sow thistle, cover crop mixture as a chopped silage to these two steers that he had. And the one was gaining 7.5 pounds per day for the last 45 days, and the other one was on that 11.5 per day on cattails, sow thistle, and cover crop. He doesn't tell that story to very many people for some reason, because you can't do that. Like I said, when he put the first steer across, he goes, "This isn't right." So he got it calibrated, and he goes, "It is right." So once again, it's, doing things differently. You get to learn different things. So we're going to start getting into some applications. So there's the theory. These are the things that are happening underneath our feet that we may or may not have heard about or cared about, or maybe we still don't care about it. But these are these are going to be some of the next steps. So when we start talking about cash cropping, how do we get a cover crop into our cash cropping system? Because it doesn't matter if you're in La Crete or if you're down, like Cooper down at Mississippi, I don't have enough time. We're growing these